In a small town, a hospital morgue was sealed in 1984 after a worker mysteriously vanished. Decades later, a journalist entered it with a camera. What he captured should have never been seen. And now, he may never be seen again. Welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights, where true horror meets restless nights. Tonight's tale drags us deep into the chilling silence of forgotten morgue, where the dead may still open their eyes and the living don't always come back. So lie back, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself. This is the Forgotten Morgue. It started with a whisper that no one believed. In the cold of December 2022, a 34-year-old freelance journalist named Evan Callahan rolled into forgotten town of Duskhaven, armed with nothing but a camcorder, a notebook, and the weight of mystery left untouched for nearly 4 decades. He wasn't here on assignment. No editor had sent him. No big media outlet was funding this trip. Evan came chasing a rumor, one that had haunted him since childhood. The Duskhaven General Hospital had shut its morgue in 1984. Officially, it was due to structural decay. But if you scratch beneath the surface of newspaper archives and buried testimonies, there was another reason, one never published. A morgue assistant named Samuel Byrne had vanished without a trace while working the night shift. His body was never recovered. No blood, no struggle, just gone. 1 minute alive, the next part of the silence. Evan had grown up hearing fragments of that story. His mother never spoke about his father, and every time Evan had asked, she'd shut down, giving him vague excuses or trembling silence. But last summer, just before she passed, she finally gave him the truth, not in words, but in a shoebox tucked under her bed. Inside were photographs, black and white, stained at the edges, and a hospital ID badge that read, Samuel Byrne, morgue technician. The face on the ID was a younger version of the man who haunted Evan's dreams for years. The man who might have been his father. Evan couldn't let it go. He needed to see the place, to walk the same halls, to ask the town what it had buried for so long, and maybe find answers that had been hidden inside the walls of that morgue. He arrived on a Friday afternoon. Duskhaven was the kind of town where the past lingered like fog in the trees. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone seemed to stare just a little too long when Evan walked into the diner with a camera strapped to his shoulder. He ordered coffee, sat in the corner booth, and watched. An older man with sunken eyes and a raspy voice eventually approached him, said his name was Jack, and that he'd worked maintenance at the hospital back when it meant something. Jack didn't need to ask why Evan was here. You're digging up things better left buried, he muttered, eyes fixed on the spoon stirring his tea. Evan leaned forward. You knew Samuel Byrne? Jack didn't flinch. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself, always humming the same tune when he walked those halls at night. One night, he clocked in, never clocked out. Place changed after that. Cold, dead. We started hearing things from the basement. Whispers, thuds, like drawers slamming on their own. Then patients started dying unexpectedly. No explanation. They shut down the morgue, sealed it off, and told us to never speak of it again. Evan's heart pounded. But it's still there, right? The morgue. Jack looked him dead in the eyes. Yeah, it's still there. But the things in there, they ain't exactly asleep. That night, Evan slipped through the rusted fence surrounding the decaying hospital. The building loomed like a tombstone, half swallowed by vines and shadow. Moonlight spilled through shattered windows, casting long beams across the moldy floors. With every step deeper inside, Evan could feel it, the air thickening, the silence pressing against his ears like water before a storm. The hallways groaned with age. Ceiling tiles hung low, as if the building itself were exhausted from keeping its secrets. He followed the map Jack had drawn on a napkin down the eastern wing, past collapsed furniture and a long-forgotten nurse's station. Eventually, he reached a rusted door within a corridor. Morgue, authorized personnel only. Chains hung from a handle, brittle with time. Evan used bolt cutters, the sound of snapping metal echoing like a gunshot. He paused. Nothing stirred. With one final push, the morgue door creaked open. It smelled like rot and silence. The room was larger than he expected. Cool tile floors, peeling walls, and a long row of body drawers along one side. The gurney in the center was stained brown, as if time had tried and failed to erase something unspeakable. Evan set up his camera, hit record, and began to document. He narrated softly, detailing every surface, every cabinet. But then something caught his eye. One of the drawers was slightly ajar. Drawer B12. He didn't remember touching it. The handle was worn, but the label beneath it read, "Unknown Mail, June 2nd, 1984. Evan felt his breath hitch. Slowly, with trembling hands, he pulled it open. The drawer groaned. Inside was a body wrapped in a decayed white sheet. The tag on the toe had long faded. The ink bled into nothingness. But as Evan leaned closer, his camera lens focused on the face. The skin was sunken, the hair gray and dry, but the jawline, sharp, familiar. The nose, the cheekbones, they looked like his own. Too much to be coincidence. And then the eyes opened, just a flutter. But they opened. Evan screamed and stumbled back, knocking over his tripod. The drawer slammed shut on its own with a metallic bang that shook the room. His breathing became ragged. His hands trembled. He checked the footage, but the recording had stopped minutes ago. The camera screen blinked. Then the room went dark. The lights that barely flickered above him died all at once. Evan was plunged into total blackness. He fumbled for his flashlight, only to find the batteries drained. Then he heard it, a soft humming, the same lullaby that had haunted his dreams as a child. Faint, echoing, getting closer, step by step, as if someone or something was walking the corridors just outside. Evan backed against the wall, his pulse thundering in his ears. And then a whisper came from the shadows. "Evan!" He froze. "Who's there?" No reply, just that same humming, closer, louder, coming from every direction at once. The walls seemed to pulse with it. Then silence. The Moore door slammed shut. He was locked in. He didn't remember falling asleep. Maybe it wasn't sleep. Maybe it was something else, a blackout brought on by fear, or something worse, something not entirely natural. But when Evan opened his eyes, the world around him was different. The moor was still there, still real, still cold, but it was darker than before. The kind of dark that felt thick, like fog you could choke on. His camera was lying on the ground, lens cracked, blinking a dead red light. The drawer that slammed shut was now wide open again and empty. The body was gone. Evan sat up slowly, heart racing, muscles stiff. The whisper of his name still echoed in his ears like a dream half remembered. He couldn't tell how long he'd been unconscious, but his watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m. The minute hand twitching, refusing to move. He reached for his flashlight again. Still dead. No signal. No light. No way out. The Moore door was still locked from the outside. He tried banging on it, but the echo just seemed to disappear into the walls, like the sound was being swallowed whole. And then something new, a noise from the other side of the room. One of the other body drawers, C6, was slowly sliding open on its own. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just deliberate, controlled, as if someone on the inside was guiding it open inch by inch. Evan backed away, whispering to himself that none of this was real, that his mind was just cracking under the pressure. But the metallic rasp of the drawer opening kept going until it stopped with a soft, final clunk. Silence. Then, a sound that should not have come from a corpse. Breathing, ragged, shaky, almost human. Evan took one step forward, against every instinct in his body, against everything screaming at him to run. He peered into the drawer, expecting another wrapped body. But this one was different. It wasn't wrapped. It was dressed in an old, tattered hospital gown. Its eyes were open. Not just open, alert, watching. The skin was pale, stretched too tightly over the bones. The mouth moved slightly, lips parting just enough to exhale another sickening, wet breath. And then, slowly and possibly, the figure sat up, It made no sound, no shriek, no unnatural burst of speed. It just rose like it had every right to, like it had simply been sleeping and had now awoken. Evan stumbled backward, crashing into the gurney in the center of the room. The thing in the drawer turned its head and looked at him. Its eyes were hollow, but behind that emptiness was something worse than death, recognition. "Why?" it whispered, its voice like torn cloth, like rotten memory and mold. Evan's mouth went dry. "W, were you?" The figure tilted its head. "You left me here." "I don't." Evan paused. He didn't know why he said it. "I didn't know." The corpse began to climb down from the drawer with slow, twitchy movements. Its limbs cracked like frozen branches. One foot touched the tile, then another. Evan ran. He slammed against the more door again, desperate, fists raw, screaming. But when he turned back, the figure was gone, vanished. Evan presses back to the door, sliding down to the floor. Tears stung his eyes, not from pain, but from confusion, helplessness. He had come here to find the truth, but the truth had claws and dead eyes and a voice from beyond the grave. From his pocket, he pulled the hospital badge, his father's, Samuel Byrne. He stared at it, and for a brief moment, the name flickered. Just once, then back to normal. He blinked, looked again. Now the name was gone entirely. The plastic tag was blank. That's when he heard it. Footsteps. Not just one set, many, slow, echoing, coming down the hall outside the morgue, toward the door. Not hurried, not frantic. Calm, measured, like an approaching funeral procession. Then silence, and the lock on the morgue door clicked. Unlocked. He stared at it. Was it a trick or an invitation? He had a choice. Stay in a room where drawers open themselves and corpses breathe, or step into a hallway where someone or something was waiting. He opened the door. The hallway was empty. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead. The hospital's walls had changed. They were more decayed than before, covered in handprints. Not blood, not dirt, just a residue of something that had pressed against the walls for far too long. Hundreds of them, all small, all faint. He moved carefully, avoiding the shadows that seemed to lean in his direction. Every door he passed had been pried open, their inside shredded. Medical records scattered across the floor. One of them caught his eye, a chart for patient 033, status, unknown. He recognized the handwriting on it. It matched the notes in the shoebox his mother had left him, his father's handwriting. Evan took the folder, flipped through it. Scribbles, unfinished notes, dates that didn't make sense. Patients listed with no names, just numbers, and at the bottom of the final page, "I hear them singing at night." A low hum began to rise again, that same melody, a lullaby in a language Evan couldn't place. Familiar, yet alien, it echoed down the halls, growing louder as he approached the elevator. The power was dead, but the door stood open, stuck halfway like jaws waiting to snap. He didn't trust it. Instead, he took the stairs. Each level down grew colder, the lights dimmer. On the basement level, the air was dense and wrong. The smell of iron, decay. There was a room at the end of the hallway, marked only by a red bulb that flickered like a heartbeat. Inside, there were filing cabinets. He pulled one open, rows of names, charts, photographs. But all the photos had their eyes scratched out, and the names, gone, just like the badge. Another drawer, bottom left, was labeled in pen, Personal Effects, S. Byrne. He hesitated, opened it. Inside was a cassette tape, an old dictaphone recorder, and a sealed envelope with his name on it. Evan, his hands trembled as he opened the envelope. The letter was short, messy handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you found your way here. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. They told me not to come back to work that night, but I did. I thought I could help them. They were cold, so cold. I thought I was helping the dead find peace. But they weren't dead, Evan. They were waiting. And now they want you too. You are my son. I'm sorry for everything. Forgive me." His throat tightened. A tear slipped down his cheek. He hit play on the tape recorder. At first, static. Then his father's voice, broken, panicked. I don't know how long I have. I've been hearing them through the vents, crawling, singing. I saw one yesterday. It knew my name. It looked like me. If they get out, there'll be no stopping them. They've lived in the dark too long. They want the world now. I locked them in, burned the back corridor. But they're learning. They're watching. And Evan, if you find this, never open drawer B12. The tape clicked. Evan stared at it. Drawer B12, the one he had already opened. Suddenly, the red light overhead went out. Total darkness again. And then the song returned. Closer, surrounding him. Dozens of voices. Humming, whispering, breathing. He turned to run, but the hallway was no longer empty. Figures. Standing, moving, crawling from the walls, all dressed in hospital gowns, all with hollow eyes and pale, expressionless faces, and leading them was a man wearing an old morgue technician's uniform, his face decayed but still recognizable. His father, Samuel Byrne. He stepped forward, slowly raising one finger to his lips. Sure. The humming had no rhythm anymore. Just layers of voices overlapping, like a choir trapped inside the lungs of the dead. Evan stumbled backward as the figure of his father stood silently, a rotted shell of a man with eyes too aware. The other figure stood behind him, unmoving, not threatening, just watching, waiting. It was as if they were letting Evan choose, like this was some sick test. His father's voice was the only sound that followed. Calm, measured. I told you not to come here. Evan shook his head, unable to speak, lips trembling with disbelief. You had a life, a future. I tried to bury the past. Evan, but blood always finds its way back. Dad, Evan whispered, unsure if he was even speaking to a ghost or if this was all just the unraveling of his mind. His father stepped closer. No noise, no breathing, just motion. They don't want the world. They only want what was taken. Evan tried to move, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. The other corpses began slowly shifting in place, like they were being drawn toward him. Gravitational pull, not aggression. The hallway stretched around him, and the air felt like static. He turned and ran without thinking. Down the corridor, past the red lights that now sparked and died, past the room with the filing cabinets, which now stood empty, back through the stairwell, upward, but the stairs weren't ending. He kept climbing and climbing, each turn revealing the same landing again and again, each floor marked B3. No matter how high he went, the building wasn't letting him out. The morgue had stopped being a place. It was something alive now, breathing, watching, rearranging. When he reached for the stairwell door, the label had changed. No longer said exit. Now it said observation room. He didn't remember seeing that room before. But something in him, curiosity, fear, maybe even a last shred of hope, made him open it. The door creaked louder than it should have. Inside, the room was bright, too bright. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a two-way mirror spanned the entire wall. Medical equipment was everywhere, outdated, yellowing, abandoned. A surgical table sat in the center, surrounded by rusted tools and dried stains. And against the wall, a TV monitor clicked to life on its own. It showed footage, black and white, security camera angles from inside the morgue, different years, different eras, all playing simultaneously. He saw bodies moving, drawers opening, workers screaming, and all of them, vanishing into thin air or being dragged into the shadows by things unseen. One tape showed his father, young, vibrant, standing in the very same hallway where Evan had just stood. But behind him, on the tape, the corpses were already moving. His father never turned around, never saw them. The next tape showed Evan himself, from an hour ago, except on the tape, he wasn't alone. Even when he thought he was, there had always been something behind him, standing just out of view, watching him from the shadows. A silhouette in the background of every shot, always present, always near, his breath caught in his throat. On the final tape, labeled in marker live feed, the screen showed the observation room itself. Evan, now, standing there, and right behind him, on the screen, was his father. But when he turned around, no one was there, just a hum. The light above flickered, and the monitor's static shifted. The faces of forgotten patients, those never identified, never claimed, flashed across the screen, one after another, until the screen froze on a single image. A boy, maybe 6 years old, pale, hollow-eyed, dressed in hospital garb, and labeled beneath his photo, Patient 033, next of kin Evan Byrne. Evan's mouth dropped open. That made no sense. He didn't have children. Never did. He reached the monitor, fingers trembling, trying to understand, trying to process, when the glass in the two-way mirror behind him cracked. Not all at once. Just a single fracture, like a hairline scar across its surface. But it kept spreading, crawling, growing like veins of ice. And then, something pounded from the other side. Once, twice, then silence. Then again violently. The mirror shattered. The pieces didn't fall. They flew, hurled into the room by some force behind it. Evan ducked, covering his face, heart hammering. When the chaos settled, he stood slowly, and behind the glassless frame was not another room. It was the morgue. Somehow, again, and standing there, in the center of that mirrored portal, was a little boy, the same boy from the tape, alive, or something close to it. His skin was pale, translucent, eyes completely black, as if they had absorbed every shadow from the entire hospital. He stared at Evan, unblinking, tilting his head slowly, and then he smiled. Not joy, something colder, a knowing smile, like a memory being remembered. Evan couldn't move, and the boy stepped through, into the observation room, into Evan's world, footsteps without sound. He stopped inches away from Evan and whispered, "You came back, like you promised." Evan's mind splintered with the words. He didn't know what the boy meant. Had he made promises in a dream, in another life? Or was this something planted in his blood long before he was born? The boy's hand reached up and touched Evan's chest, and suddenly he remembered the dreams he'd had as a child of cold rooms and white walls. The nights he'd wake up screaming, calling for someone named Liam, the imaginary friend his mother always dismissed. But Liam wasn't imaginary. He had lived in this hospital. He had died here, alone, unclaimed, and Evan had been there too, not as a visitor, but as a patient. He had been admitted at age 4 after a near-drowning incident. He and Liam had shared a room, and one night, the hospital lost power. Liam had a seizure. The nurses never came. He died in the dark, and Evan had promised, "I won't forget you," but he had. Grown up, left, buried the trauma, and now Liam was back. "You said you'd stay," the boy whispered, and Evan, barely breathing, choked out a single word. "I'm sorry." The boy's smile widened. "Then stay now." The lights went out. Total darkness. No time passed, or maybe all time did. When light returned, the hospital was gone. Nothing but silence. A janitor entered the ruins the next day after a complaint of noise. But the building was empty. Every hallway clean. Every drawer shut. And not a single sign of anyone inside. Except for one thing. In the morgue drawer labeled B12, there was now a new tag. Fresh. Written in pen. Evan Byrne, unclaimed. And in the far corner of the drawer, a camera. Lens cracked. Still blinking red. Recording. Still humming. Still waiting. For the next one to come looking for the dead. Some rooms are locked for a reason. Some doors, once open, never shut again. Tonight, On Mr. Dar's nights, the story of a boy who was murdered in silence, and the secret still rotting above the ceiling. This is The Boy in the Attic. You're listening to Mr. Dar's Nights, where real horror bleeds into bedtime. If you're new here, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready to descend into the dark. Let's begin. The realtor never mentioned the attic. When the Winslow family moved into 1826, Dawnbrook Lane in late autumn of 1997, they were mostly concerned with the plumbing, the creaky foundation, and the way the kitchen tilted just slightly toward the northeast corner. It was an old house, built in 1903, colonial structure with a warped porch and a sloping backyard that overlooked what's far too silent. Paul Winslow, a local teacher, and his wife Janet had 2 children, 8-year-old Noah and 12-year-old Kyle. The boys hated moving, but the promise of a bigger room each and a backyard to run around and soften the blow. It wasn't until 3 weeks into their move that Paul noticed a thin, horizontal seam in the ceiling of the hallway closet upstairs. It wasn't just insulation. It was a hidden latch, an attic. They hadn't been told there was one. With a bit of tugging, Paul unfolded a rusty ladder from the ceiling and climbed up, flashlight in hand. Dust rained down as he moved. The air up there was stale and heavy, like it hadn't been touched in decades. Motes of dust floated like ghosts in the flashlight's beam. He expected boxes, old Christmas decorations, forgotten luggage. What he found was a room within the attic, walled off crudely with plywood, padlocked shut with a corroded brass latch. No windows, no ventilation, just a door in the attic that shouldn't be there. Paul called Janet up, and they stood there in silence, staring at the lock. "I don't like this," she said softly. Neither did he, but curiosity got the better of them. The lock was old, fragile. Paul broke it open with a crowbar the next morning. Inside they found dust, a decaying mattress, and something far worse, scratch marks on the inside of the walls. Deep, ragged, as if made by tiny fingernails, clawing at the boards in desperation. A cracked plastic toy soldier lay abandoned in the corner, and on the back wall, scrawled in faded red chalk, "I didn't want to die." The police were called. At first, they were skeptical, but after forensic analysis of the mattress and walls, a horrifying truth emerged. Blood, human, tested and matched. A child, estimated to be around 10 years old. Unidentified. No missing persons report had ever been filed that matched the DNA. The file was archived. Unknown juvenile. Presumed homicide victim. Case suspended. The attic was sealed again, but the boy didn't stay gone. It started small. The baby monitor in Noah's room picked up static late at night, always around 3:13 a.m. At first, just white noise, then whispering, a child's voice, asking for help, saying a name they didn't recognize. Mikey. No one in the house had that name. Then came the cold spots, areas of the house that felt 30 degrees colder for no reason, particularly near the attic, lights flickering, the dog barking violently at the ceiling. The final straw was when Kyle, the older son, started having night terrors. Every night, the same dream. He was trapped in a room with no windows, screaming for his mother, hearing footsteps above him, then silence, then the trapdoor opening, and 2 hands reaching down. One night, Paul stayed up, sitting by the monitor. He watched as the static turned clear. Not white noise anymore, but a boy, standing in Noah's room, not moving, just watching, thin, pale, with deep bruises around his neck, eyes blank, but mouth moving silently. Paul rushed in, but the boy was gone. When he checked the recording, nothing showed, but the monitor still whispered, hours after the room had emptied, "Find my killer." Word spread fast. Janet demanded they move, but something in Paul, something twisted with guilt or curiosity, needed to stay. He told her they'd leave in a week. He just needed to understand what had happened, who the boy was. He installed motion sensor cameras in the attic, 4 of them, infrared, high-end. The first night, nothing. The second, blurry static. On the third night, something appeared. The cameras showed the sealed room, still empty. Then, At 3:13 a.m. exactly, one camera blinked and showed shadow. A figure, short, standing inside the sealed room, facing the camera. But his features didn't move like a living child. They flickered like old tape, glitching, and the eyes, black voids that looked into the lens with recognition. The mouth moved again. Same words, "Find my killer." Then the screen went black. But the most terrifying part? On that same night, Paul's colleague, an old friend named Raymond who'd helped him research the house's past, died in a car crash on the outskirts of town. His brakes had failed. No witnesses. No explanation. And the last text he'd sent to Paul before he died? "I think I found out who the boy was." That was only the beginning. Because the moment Paul dug deeper, more deaths followed. The retired officer who responded to the original attic discovery was found dead in his home. Heart attack, but his walls were scratched. Deeply, claw marks leading to his bedroom. A local librarian who provided newspaper clippings to Paul, killed in a hit and run the next day. Each person who came too close to uncovering the boy's identity met the same fate, one by one, as if someone not the boy, but someone alive, was watching, was waiting, silencing. The killer hadn't vanished. He had simply grown old, and he was still in town, still protecting the secret. And now, Paul was next. Paul didn't sleep for days. Every night, he sat at the kitchen table with a pot of lukewarm coffee and a stack of old documents spread across it with grain like ancient relics. He wasn't just looking into his attic anymore. He was diving into the underbelly of the town itself. The more he read, the less sense things made. There were gaps in records, names missing, years with no documented events, old newspaper archives with torn pages, right where important headlines would have been. The town library had microfilm copies, but every time Paul visited, the reels were scratched or distorted when he reached anything between 1988 and 1994, like someone had erased a piece of history. But something kept pulling him back to a single photo. It was in the background of a 1990 town fair image. A crowd of smiling faces, most of them looking toward the camera, except one, a boy, standing in the far corner of the frame, not smiling, not celebrating, just staring directly into lens, eyes wide, expression blank. Paul zoomed in until the pixels blurred. The boy was maybe 9 or 10, pale, shirt buttoned to the top. His small hands clenched tightly at his sides like he didn't want to be there. Paul froze when he saw the timestamp. June 13th, 1990. Exactly 7 years before they moved in. Exactly 3 years before the Winslow house was briefly seized by the county due to a suspected contamination, though the nature of that contamination was never detailed in any file. He asked the librarian to pull anything related to the boy from the archives. She promised she would. 2 days later, she was dead. A gas leak. Or at least, that's what the news said. Paul started to feel like the house had infected his mind. Noah, his youngest, refused to sleep in his room now. Said the boy sat at the edge of his bed and whispered things at night. Kyle had started wetting the bed again. Janet barely spoke anymore. The silence in the house grew thicker each day, like the walls themselves were listening. One night, Paul sat in the attic again. This time, he brought a tape recorder, set it in the center of the floor, hit record, left the room, came back in the morning. What he heard chilled him more than anything he'd ever encountered. It wasn't just static. It was a voice, a boy's voice, crying, not wailing, not screaming, just as quiet, defeated sobbing. And then, over it, a gruff male voice. "You made me do this." Silence. "You were never supposed to be here." Then a dragging sound. Something heavy. Then a final, weak breath. Paul dropped the recorder. His hands trembled for hours after. That voice, the man's voice, it sounded familiar, like someone he knew, someone he'd heard speak dozens of times. But the name wouldn't come. Not yet. He started sleeping in short bursts, afraid of what would come in the dark. His dreams were filled with trapdoors, shadows crawling through ceilings, and a voice begging over and over again, "Help me, find him, before he finds you." Then came the night Paul woke to find Kyle gone. He tore through the house. Bedroom empty. Bathroom empty. He found his son standing at the top of the attic ladder, eyes closed, asleep. "Mikey says it's my turn," he whispered, barely audible. Paul snatched him back and locked the attic. The next morning, Paul packed his wife and children into the car and sent them to her sister's home 3 hours away. He told her he'd follow in a day or two. He lied. Paul stayed behind, knowing something was unfinished. The pieces were swirling, coming together. He needed one final clue, and that came when he dug through an old desk drawer in the basement. It was sealed shut with rusted nails. Inside was a weathered manila folder, stamped with the faded crest of the Dawnbrook Children's Aid Society. The society had been defunct for decades. Inside the folder, adoption records, redacted names, case numbers, and a faded photograph paper clipped to the top corner. A little boy, buttoned shirt, blank stare, same as the photo from a fair. Name beneath it, Michael Elroy. Paul froze. That last name, Elroy. Why did it feel so familiar? He flipped through the documents until he found the original case manager's name at the bottom. Supervisor, Harold Elroy. Paul dropped the folder like it had burned him. Harold Elroy was a retired sheriff, now in his 70s. Still lived 2 streets over. He had attended Paul's wedding, sent Christmas cards to their house, brought apple pie when they moved into town. Friendly, harmless, always smiling. But Paul remembered something. Years ago, during a neighborhood barbecue, Harold had told a story about his nephew who ran away as a child. A vague, sad tale that never quite added up. Paul had brushed it off. Now he wondered if that nephew had ever really run away at all. That night, Paul couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. At 3:13 a.m., the power flickered. He sat on the floor of the attic, clutching a flashlight, recorder in hand. And then it happened, a low thud above his head. But there was nothing above the attic. He turned the flashlight upward. The ceiling looked normal, until it didn't. The paint began to peel. Cracks spiderwebbed across the drywall. A bulge formed, like something was pressing from the other side. Then, a sharp slam. And in the center of the ceiling, a small, child-sized handprint appeared in the dust. Still fresh, still warm. Paul backed out slowly, his breath short, chest tight. The moment he stepped into the hallway, his phone rang. Blocked number. He answered. Nothing. Just breathing. Then, just as he was about to hang up, a voice rasped through the speaker. "Stop digging. You're next." The line went dead. Paul knew what he had to do. He had to confront Harold Elroy before anyone else died. But when he arrived at the man's house the next day, everything was eerily normal. Harold was pruning his rose bushes, smiling, wearing gardening gloves. But something in his eyes had changed. There was no warmth, only cold calculation. "Paul," he said, not missing a beat, "you look tired." Long night. Paul stared. "What happened to him?" he asked. Harold didn't flinch. "Who?" "You know who." A pause. Then that same calm voice. "He was sick, broken, didn't fit in. The system failed him. I couldn't let him keep going like that, so I gave him peace." Paul's blood ran cold. "You killed him?" "I saved him," Harold said, brushing dirt from his gloves. "And I'd do it again. And I'd do it to anyone who tries to take that away from me." Paul backed away, but Harold didn't move, just smiled. And in that smile, Paul saw something monstrous. Not guilt, not regret, only pride. And then Harold said something that chilled him to the marrow. The attic wasn't just for him. It's ready for another. That night, Paul didn't go home. He checked into a motel with one bag and the recorder tucked in his coat. He played it again. This time, the boy's voice was stronger, clearer, no longer crying, just a whisper. "He's going to bury you too." And with that, Paul knew The boy wasn't the only ghost tied to that house. There was another one, still breathing, still digging graves. Paul didn't go back to the house for 3 days. He stayed in that cheap motel on the edge of town, every curtain drawn tight, every light on, sleeping in jolts, a kitchen knife tucked under his pillow like that could do anything against what was already in motion. He tried calling Janet. No answer. He texted her to stay where she was, not to come back, to never step foot in that house again. The longer he stayed away, the more he realized he wasn't just running from a house. He was running from a secret this town had tried to bury for decades. But secrets don't stay buried, especially not when a child soul is the one pulling at the roots. On the 4th day, he drove back. He didn't park in his driveway. He left the car 2 blocks down and walked into the back gate. The house looked peaceful, too peaceful, like it was waiting for him. He opened the door slowly. The air inside was still. No sound, no ticking clock, no fridge hum, no creaking floorboards. Dead silence. The attic door was open, waiting. He stepped up the ladder, 1 rung at a time. Halfway up, he felt it, the cold. It wasn't just temperature. It was something deeper, a chill that moved through your bones and sat behind your eyes. The kind of cold that feels like it's been watching you for years. He stepped into the attic. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The little room in the corner, the one he had discovered on the first night, was now wide open. No furniture, just darkness. And in the center, a box, wooden, carved, covered in dust. Paul stepped closer. On the lid, etched in fading cursive, Michael Elroy. He knelt and opened it slowly. Inside, there was a bundle of old drawings, childish scribbles, a house, a man, a little boy. The boy always had no mouth. The man always had red scribbles around his hands. In one drawing, the man held a rope. In another, the boy was inside a box, buried underground. Paul turned over the last drawing. On the back, in shaky pencil, he said no one would believe me. Paul's heart beat like thunder. He closed the box. And that's when the attic door slammed shut behind him. He spun around. Nothing there. Then a whisper from the dark. "He's here." The flashlight flickered again. Paul backed up until he hit the wall. A soft creak echoed from the hallway outside the attic. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Then the voice. Gravelly. Familiar. "You never should have come back. Harold." Paul lunged toward the attic ladder, but the door wouldn't budge. Sealed tight. He banged and shouted. Silence. Then movement. A shadow on the other side. Harold was sealing him in. From inside the attic, Paul heard the sound of a hammer driving nails through the doorframe. One by one. Then Harold's voice. Same place. Same box. One more kid who couldn't stay out of grown folks' business. Paul panicked. Looked around. No windows. No vents. Just the walls. Then something new. A panel on the far side. Slightly ajar. He rushed over. Pulled it open. Behind it, stairs. Old. Crumbling. Narrow. Leading down. A hidden passage. He descended without thinking. Breath shallow. Legs trembling. The stairs twisted endlessly downward, far beneath the house. He didn't know where he was anymore. And when he reached the bottom, the air was thick, damp, molded, like a cave buried in grief. He flicked the flashlight ahead and saw them. Dozens of boxes, child-sized, some marked, some not, each one sealed, each one silent. He dropped to his knees, and that's when he heard it, a voice behind him. "I told you to stop digging." Harold. Somehow, he had found another way down. He stood at the entrance of the underground chamber, shotgun in hand, the barrel low, his face pale in the flickering light. "You don't understand," Harold said. "They were broken. The system was broken. They came from nothing. No family, No hope. I gave them peace. Paul stood slowly. You murdered them. I saved them. Harold snapped. Do you know what this world would have done to them? Turned them into monsters. Predators. I stopped it before it could start. Paul took a step forward. I found the drawings, Harold. I heard Michael's voice. He was begging for help. Harold's hands shook slightly. That boy was evil, he muttered. He knew things. He watched me like he could see what was inside. I couldn't let him grow up like that. Paul's voice dropped. So you locked him in a box and buried him under our house? Harold didn't answer, but his eyes, they answered everything. He wasn't remorseful. He was righteous. You're not going to leave here, Paul, he whispered. He raised a gun, but before he could pull the trigger, the lights died. Total darkness. Then a scream. Not Paul's, Harold's. The flashlight flickered back to life in Paul's hand, and Harold was gone. The shotgun clattered on the stone floor, and in the darkness ahead, a faint figure stood. Small, still, a boy. Michael, no longer crying, just watching. Paul stepped forward slowly. The boy turned, pointed at the far wall. Paul followed his gaze, and there, carved in a rock with trembling hands, was a message. Thank you for listening. Then the boy vanished. Gone. No sound. No air. Just peace. When Paul emerged from the passage, it was morning. Sunlight stretched across the living room. The attic door hung open. The house was silent, but not the same silence as before. This was different. The air felt lighter. Paul called the police, told them everything, showed them the drawings, the tunnel, the boxes. For the first time in 30 years, Dawnbrook police filed charges against a man who was supposed to be a hero. Harold Elroy was found in the basement crawl space, his body contorted, eyes wide open, face frozen in a scream no one could explain. Cause of death, unknown. The news spread fast. The house was condemned, sealed, left to rot. But Paul never left town. He stayed, not because he loved it, but because he had to make sure it didn't happen again. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, he hears it, a child's laughter, far off, not sad, not frightened, just free. Michael's finally at rest. But Dawnbrook? Dawnbrook will never forget, because the attic is still there. The drawings are still there. And one day, someone else will open that door again. And the boy in the attic? He'll be waiting. Tonight, on Mr. Dar's Nights, we venture deep into the sealed wing of a prison long forgotten. A riot, a massacre, and something still whispering from the dark. This is Story 3, a tale of time, death, and a voice that knows exactly when you'll die. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let the darkness in. The first thing you learn working nights at Brookridge Correctional Facility is don't ask questions you're not ready to hear answers to, especially about Block E. Everyone calls it the Lost Block, the section of the prison that's been sealed since the late 1970s after a riot took out more than 20 inmates and 2 guards. Officially, structural damage, safety risk, no longer in use. Unofficially, well, that's the part nobody really wants to talk about. My name's Lucas Wren, and I took the night shift at Brookridge about 6 months ago. I was new in town, new in life, really. Everything before this was just chaos and mistakes. So when I got the job offer, I took it. Stable pay, room for overtime, no questions asked. The prison itself is cold, gray, quiet, especially after 10 p.m. It sits on the edge of town, like a dead thing that just refuses to rot. A skeleton made of steel and stone. My first few shifts were uneventful. I was partnered with an older guard named Phil who mostly read paperback westerns and smoked too much. This place will rot your soul if you let it, he told me one night. I thought he was being dramatic. Then on my 7th night, I heard it, a whisper. I was making rounds on the 3rd floor when the radio clipped to my belt crackled to life. No one pressing the button, no one nearby. Just a voice, low, raspy. Ran 216. Ran. It said my name and a time. 2:16. I froze. Checked the time. 2:15 a.m. I was alone in that hallway. Cameras were offline on that floor due to a wiring upgrade, but even with the dark corners and flickering lights, I'd been sure no one else was there. I stared at the radio. 2:16 a.m. hit. The fluorescent light above me burst with a sharp pop. Shards of glass fell like rain. And just for a second, less than that, I saw something, the reflection on the broken glass near my boot. A face staring at me from behind the cell door of what should have been an empty block. From Block E. The problem was, Block E wasn't on this floor. Wasn't supposed to even connect here. But that door, that whisper, it came from the West Wing. The sealed wing. The one every guard gets told to avoid. The one with the big steel warning sign. Area condemned. Do not enter. I didn't sleep that morning. Didn't tell anyone. But I started digging. In old records, Block E showed up in blueprints from 1961 to 1978. It was officially sealed after a massive riot where inmates took over the floor for 3 days. The National Guard had to intervene. The incident was never fully documented. What little I found was scattered, redacted, names missing, but there was one mention in a forgotten report. Inmate Marcus Vale, deceased, status irregular, irregular. That was all it said. I kept hearing the whispers over the next few nights. Each time, the same voice. Sometimes it said times. Other times it whispered names of other guards. Phil, Jenny, Miguel, always followed by something strange. Lights flickering, locks opening by themselves. Cameras going dark for no reason. I finally decided to bring a recorder. My phone. Just hit record and keep it running in my vest pocket while I made my rounds. The idea was simple. Catch a whisper. Prove I wasn't crazy. But what I recorded, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a prophecy. I played it back in the guardroom after shift. Just me. The hum of an old vending machine, and the slow dawn light slipping through barred windows. The audio crackled at first. Then, like someone was breathing against the mic. Lucas Wren, 216. You see him, you die. Then nothing. Silence. I stare at my phone like it might explode in my hand. 2:16 again. That same time. I checked the timestamp. It had been recorded at exactly 2:15 and 57 seconds a.m. I don't know why, but I went pale. I felt like something invisible had just brushed past my shoulder. That was the night I went back to the West Wing. Alone. I know. Stupid. But something about that voice. It wasn't just a threat. It was a call. Like someone trying to be heard after decades in the dark. I used an old maintenance key. The lock was rusted but still functional. The gate groaned like it hadn't opened in years. I stepped into Block E. The air was thicker. The lights barely worked. Most of the cells had rusted bars, names scratched into the walls, bloody fingerprints in corners where time had stopped paying attention. And then, near the end of the hall, cell 12, still sealed, except for one thing, a voice coming from inside. I see you, Wren. I dropped my flashlight, and before I could pick it up, the door opened by itself. A burst of air hit me like a punch. Cold, moldy, dead, and in the dark, a figure, thin, tall, eyes like cracked glass, no lips, just rows of broken teeth. It stepped forward slowly, one hand raised. Then it whispered, "You die at 2:16. I ran, didn't look back, didn't sleep for 3 nights after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face. He wasn't alive, but he wasn't gone. And worst of all, he knew me. I went to Warden Clyde, told him everything, showed him the audio. He didn't even flinch, just lit a cigarette and muttered, 'Shouldn't have gone down there.' I asked him who Marcus Vale was. He looked me dead in the eyes. He was a riot. He never left. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer, just got up and walked out. The whispers haven't stopped. And every night now, I hear more than just mine. I hear Phil's, Jenny's, Miguel's. Names whisper by the dark, one by one, and each time someone disappears. Next shift, I'm off, but if I don't come back, check cell 12. And if you hear a whisper at 2:16 a.m., run. No matter where you are, run, because Marcus is still there, and he's not alone. I couldn't shake it. The feeling that something was wrong with Block E, and I didn't know how deep it went until I started talking to the other guards. The problem was, no one wanted to talk about it. No one wanted to acknowledge that something wasn't right. But that didn't stop me. Phil, my older partner, always told me to be careful. A job like this, you got to keep your head down. You don't ask questions about things that don't make sense. Otherwise, you're asking for trouble. But I was already neck deep in it. And the whispers, those whispers were following me. Every night, I heard more of them. Ren 2:16, he's coming. He's already here. It wasn't just the voice of Marcus Vale anymore. It was like the entire block was talking. All the old souls, all the inmates who'd never left. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I went straight to the security office. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe answers. Maybe someone else had heard the whispers too. Maybe I wasn't going crazy. I found Dave, one of the senior guards, sitting behind the desk, half asleep. I'd never seen him this way before, usually sharp, watching the screens like a hawk. He didn't even look up as I walked in. Dave, I said, my voice quieter than usual. I need to talk to you about Block E. He froze, just for a second. Then he looked at me, eyes dull, as if he'd been expecting this. You don't want to talk about that, Ren, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. Believe me, some things you don't go digging for. I didn't back down. I'm hearing things. Whispers. Every night. It's coming from Block E. What happened there, Dave? He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the monitor in front of him. You're asking about stuff that should be buried, but you're already knee-deep, aren't you? Can't turn back now. My pulse quickened. He continued, his voice low. It wasn't just a riot, you know. They were chosen. Chosen? I asked, stepping closer. Yeah, he said, eyes flicking back to the screens. Marcus Vale. He wasn't like the others. He was something else. He had this power, this influence. He knew things about the guards, about the cells, about the layout, about everything. People called him a leader, a rebel, but some said he was cursed. A chill crawled down my spine. What do you mean by curse? I asked, feeling the air grow colder. Dave's face twisted into something between a frown and a grimace. You want the truth? You can't handle it. Vale died in that riot, but when he died, he didn't leave. And anyone who went near Block E after that, they started hearing him. I felt my stomach turn. And you can't stop it, can you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dave didn't respond, but I didn't need him to. I knew now. Marcus Vale wasn't just dead. He was still here, in the prison, trapping people, keeping them from escaping. The whispers were more than just sounds. They were a warning. I turned to leave, but as I did, something caught my eye on the screen. The CCTV feed for Block E was live. I hadn't been able to access that feed for weeks. It was supposed to be down, under maintenance. But there it was. The camera was focused on cell 12, the same one I had seen that night, the one where Vale had appeared. My heart stopped, the screen flickered, and then, just like that, Marcus Vale's face filled the screen. Not on the monitor, but on the wall behind him, written in what could only be blood. You were warned. I stumbled backward. Feeling my stomach flip, I looked at Dave. His expression was the same. Blank, numb. You saw it, didn't you? He asked, his voice hollow. I nodded. What the hell does it mean? He exhaled a long breath and looked away. It means it's already too late, Ren. You've crossed the line. You're in it now. I need to get out of here, I said, shaking my head. This is insane. No one told me it was like this. You never asked, Dave muttered, and now you've seen too much. I didn't have time to process what he meant. I turned and rushed out of the office, heading straight for the exit. But something stopped me. Something cold. Something that froze my bones. The lights flickered. The air grew heavier. And I heard it. Ren. The voice was closer this time. The walls seemed to close in around me. I knew then. It wasn't just the voice of Marcus Vale I was hearing. It was the voices of the prisoners, the ones who had never left. They were trying to get me. I was being pulled deeper into something that had been buried for too long. I reached the exit and shoved the door open, but as soon as I stepped into the parking lot, I stopped cold. Phil's car was still in the lot. I'd worked with Phil for 6 months. He always left at the same time as me, no matter what. But tonight, his car was parked and the lights were off. I rushed over to the car, knocking on the window. Phil, hey man, you good? Nothing. I opened the door. The seat was empty, but the air was thick, stale, like it hadn't been touched in hours. And that's when I saw it. On the passenger side floorboard, tucked under the seat, was a small piece of paper, folded neatly. I reached for it with shaking hands and opened it slowly. You're next. 216. The handwriting was exactly the same as the one on the wall in cell 12. It was Marcus Vale, and now he was coming for me. The air in the parking lot felt heavier as I stood there, staring at that crumpled note in my hand. The words burned into my mind like they were seared into my soul. You're next. 216. I had no idea what it meant. I didn't want to know, but deep down I felt it, that sense of inevitable doom. Marcus Vale had made it clear. I wasn't safe. None of us were. I needed to leave. I should have just driven away, gone home, forgotten about all of this. But my feet felt rooted to the ground. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to go back, that I needed to find out what happened in that prison, what had really happened during that riot, what happened in Block E. I tried to push it out of my mind, to drive away, but I couldn't. I grabbed the note and folded it back into my pocket, making my way toward the entrance of the prison once again. The night had grown even colder, and the wind whipped around me, carrying with it a whisper. Ren. It was like a command, pulling me toward the darkened halls. I tried to brush it off, but something told me that leaving was no longer an option. Whatever had happened in the past, whatever evil lingered in the walls of this place, it was pulling me deeper into its grasp. I didn't know who I was running from anymore. Was it the voices? The ghosts? Marcus Vale? Or was it something worse? Something far more sinister? I made my way through the prison's front doors, the hallways eerily silent. I passed through the usual security checkpoint and walked straight to the old security room. The lights inside flickered as I stepped in, the air tasting thick with fear. I checked the monitors again. Everything seemed normal. No signs of anything unusual. The prison was just as it always was. Except for one thing. Cell 12 was no longer empty. There was movement, a figure. I leaned in closer, heart hammering in my chest. The figure was standing in the center of the cell, staring directly at the camera. It was Marcus Vale. He wasn't dead. He wasn't a ghost. He was alive. The monitor flickered again, and for a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, it was really him, just as he had appeared before, standing in that exact spot, eyes cold, full of rage. But there was something different this time. His face was twisted, as if he had been waiting for me, for this moment. The whispers started again, but this time, they weren't coming from the static in the air. They were coming from the monitor itself. Ren, come closer. My heart dropped to my stomach. I backed away from the screen, panic rising in my throat. Suddenly, the room felt suffocating. My chest tightened, the air thicker than ever before. I couldn't breathe. You're already here, the voice said again, this time clear and unmistakable. The words echoed in my mind. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. My feet wouldn't lift. No matter how hard I tried to move, the whispers intensified, surrounding me, filling my mind with memories of things I couldn't remember. Ren. And then the monitor flashed again. For a split second, I saw the faces of the other guards. Phil, Dave, they were all there, trapped behind the screen, staring blankly at me with eyes that were vacant, hollow. They had been absorbed into this nightmare, just like I was about to be. The walls seemed to close in. The lights flickered more violently now, strobing faster until they went completely black. I was alone in the dark, but I wasn't really alone, was I? I could still hear it. The whispers, the soft hiss of voices that weren't my own. He's coming for you. I turned around sharply, my breath quickening. A figure stood in the corner of the room. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as I blinked, the details became clearer. It was a man. No, not just any man. It was Marcus Vale. I felt the blood drain from my face as he stepped closer. He didn't move like a living person. There was no sound to his footsteps, no creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. His body seemed to float above the ground. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I opened my mouth to say something, but no sound came out. The walls felt like they were pressing against me, suffocating me. And then Marcus spoke. You don't remember me, do you, Ren? His voice was cold, void of all humanity. It felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. His presence seemed to fill every inch of the room. You're my replacement, aren't you? He continued, his smile growing wider with every word. Just like the others, I was gasping for air now, my throat dry, burning with the effort to scream, but nothing came out. I waited for you. The lights flickered again, this time revealing the walls of the room. But they weren't just walls anymore. The cell, the entire space, had changed. The concrete had cracked, revealing veins of black, the same dark veins I'd seen in the security footage, crawling under the skin of the prison. The walls were alive. The riot wasn't the end, Ren, Marcus whispered, his breath now hot on my neck. It was only the beginning. Suddenly, the whispering intensified, and I felt something cold, something wet, crawl at my spine. I turned, looking over my shoulder, and there, hanging from the ceiling, was the body of a man. Phil. His eyes were wide open, mouth agape in a silent scream. His skin was pale, stretched tight, and there was something on his neck, a dark mark like a bruise, spreading slowly, strangling him. And I realized something horrifying. I was next. In 1982, a set of tapes surfaced that no one could have anticipated and no one could ever have explained. They weren't just your usual police interview tapes. These were far more disturbing, far more chilling. It began with the death of a man, Michael Durant, a suspect in the murder of 11 people over the course of 2 years. The police had been investigating him for months, slowly piecing together the evidence. But the break came when Durant unexpectedly turned himself in. On the night of his confession, he was eerily calm, almost as if he had already made peace with his crimes. The interrogation was recorded, but what was supposed to be a routine police confession turned into a nightmare, a series of chilling tapes that would eventually leak to the public and forever change the lives of those who listened. Michael Durant's voice, cold and detached, dripped with an unnatural sense of calmness as he spoke. I've killed 11 people, he said, his voice smooth, calculated. I'm not proud of it, but I did it, and there's nothing you can do to change that now. They were all just pieces of a game, pieces to be taken out one by one. The detectives had been stunned. Durant was cooperative, willing to answer questions, but there was something unsettling in the way he spoke. He didn't seem like a man racked with guilt. He didn't seem like a man in fear of what awaited him. No, he was almost detached. He continued. The first one was a mistake, but after that it was all too easy. It was like I could hear them, the voices, calling to me, telling me who to take next. But there was one who wouldn't shut up, the one who kept whispering in my ear. the one who told me it was all okay. The detectives exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't a normal confession. There was something strange, almost unnatural in the way Durant spoke. He wasn't confessing because he felt remorse. He wasn't confessing because he thought it would save him. He was confessing because he had to. Who was the one whispering? One of the detectives asked, leaning forward. Durant's response sent a chill down their spines. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Something I summoned. He promised me he'd make everything okay. He promised me that I wouldn't feel guilty anymore. Durant's voice became almost hypnotic as he spoke of this entity, this thing he had supposedly brought into his life. He described it as a dark presence, something that existed beyond the normal, beyond human understanding, a figure that whispered to him, guided his hand in the darkness, and made him feel justified in taking the lives of others. It wasn't murder, Durant said. It was a service, a cleansing. You wouldn't understand. You think I'm a killer, but what if I'm actually the savior? What if I'm the one who's saving them? The detective paused the tape and stared at the recorder. No one had ever heard anything like this. A man who, while admitting his crimes, justified them by speaking of an entity, something supernatural, something far more terrifying than what anyone had imagined. But it wasn't just what Durant was saying that was chilling. It was the sound in his voice. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the content that unnerved the detectives, but the tone, the eerie calmness of his words, as if he truly believed he was doing the right thing. The interrogation continued, and Durant began to recount the murders in detail. He spoke of his victims like they were part of a game, a series of moves in a chess match. Each death was executed with an almost clinical precision, and yet it wasn't the murders themselves that unsettled the detectives. It was what happened next. Durant spoke in hushed tones, as if speaking to someone in the room with him. The detective asked who he was talking to, but Durant just smiled, his eyes darting from side to side. He's always with me now, Durant said, his gaze turning blank. He's not here in the room, but I can feel him watching, always watching. The tapes were sealed and locked away as evidence, and Durant was later convicted of his crimes. The case seemed closed, but that was just the beginning. Years later, in 1986, the tapes, which had been kept under strict lock and key, mysteriously leaked to the public. The tapes found their way into the hands of investigative journalists, conspiracy theorists, and eventually the public. Those who listened were haunted by the words that Durant spoke, but the most terrifying part was yet to come, for as the tapes spread, so did the rumors. The people Durant had confessed to killing, the 11 victims, were still alive, or at least they looked alive. But anyone who came in contact with them couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They were different. They were almost as if they were living a twisted, broken version of life, like the life force had been drained from them, but their bodies had remained. People began to ask questions. Was it possible that Durant had truly killed these people? Or had the entity he spoke of done something far worse? Had they really died? Or was this just another piece of the twisted puzzle? And then, people who had heard the tapes started experiencing strange occurrences. Their phones would ring at exactly midnight, and when they picked up, all they would hear was static, followed by a voice that sounded just like Durant's. But Durant was dead. He had been executed shortly after his conviction. Yet his voice, that voice, echoed through the static on the other side of the line. I told you, you wouldn't understand. Those who had been involved with the case began to fear for their own lives. What if the murders hadn't been just murders? What if this entity Durant had spoken of had found a way to transcend the boundaries of life and death? What if the voices on those tapes weren't just confessions? They were warnings. And then the strange phenomena began. The victims who had supposedly survived the murders, those who were still alive, began to disappear one by one. No one saw them leave. No one knew where they went. But every time one of them vanished, the voice on the tapes would get louder, clearer. I told you they weren't safe, the voice would say. And that's when the investigators realized this wasn't just a case about murder. It was about something far darker. Something that shouldn't be messing with the living. Something that had followed Durant. And now, it had set its sights on them. The tapes had gone viral. At first, It was just an eerie story whispered around the darker corners of the internet. The chilling confession of a killer, the unsettling mention of a mysterious entity. People were drawn to it, seeking answers, searching for meaning. The journalists, the skeptics, and the curious began to dissect the recordings, analyzing every word, every pause, trying to make sense of what Michael Durant had confessed. But the more they listened, the more questions arose. Durant's confession wasn't just a bizarre admission of guilt. It was a gateway to something much darker, something that shouldn't exist. The rumors about the surviving victims, the people Durant had supposedly killed, had taken root and started to spread. Those who had been around them noticed changes. They weren't acting the same. They weren't fully alive. A few claimed that the once vibrant personalities had become dull, as if something had drained them of their spirit. They looked like ghosts in human form, walking around in their daily lives, yet their eyes were vacant, like they weren't really there. Her house was found empty. No signs of forced entry. No belongings missing. It was as though she had simply vanished into thin air. And that's when the others began to disappear too. Jim Walker, the man who had been Durant's second victim, left work one evening and never returned. His co-workers spoke of his erratic behavior before he left. He had been acting strange for days. His eyes were bloodshot, and he'd been muttering to himself, though no one could make out the words. Jim had seemed disconnected, like he wasn't fully aware of what was happening around him. He told one of his co-workers that he was feeling the pull, and then he was gone. Then it wasn't just the victims. Those who had listened to the tapes started disappearing as well. There was Brian Morris, a journalist who had spent months investigating the case. He had been one of the first to get his hands on the tapes and had been relentless in trying to uncover the truth behind Durant's confession. He was convinced the tapes were a hoax, some sort of elaborate prank designed to manipulate the public. But after a week of intense investigation, Brian stopped responding to messages. His family said he had gone quiet, locking himself in his room, refusing to speak to anyone. The police found his apartment weeks later, abandoned. There was no trace of Brian, only a single piece of paper left on the floor, a scribbled note, soaked in blood. "He's coming for you too." The leaks of the tapes had triggered a chain reaction. The once mundane confession had now escalated into something far more dangerous. Those who had heard Durant's confession and hadn't believed in the supernatural started experiencing inexplicable phenomena. Phones ringing with no caller ID, static-laced voices repeating Durant's chilling words. People would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with a feeling of impending doom hovering over them. They felt as if something was watching them from the darkness. And then the nightmares began. It wasn't just the voices from the tapes that were tormenting them now. It was the presence, the entity that Durant had so cryptically spoken about. The police, now fully aware of the strange events surrounding the tapes, started pulling their resources together. They thought it was some kind of twisted game or mass hysteria, but the reports were consistent. There was something wrong, something beyond human understanding was happening. People weren't just being killed. They were being erased. And then it all became clear. Dr. Leonard Howe, a psychiatrist who had studied the tapes extensively, revealed the truth. He had been a part of the original investigation into Durant's confession, and over the years, he had delved deeper into the psychology of the killer. He theorized that Durant's confession wasn't just a story of guilt. It was an account of possession. You see, Dr. Howe explained in an interview, Durant was not confessing to his crimes. He was confessing to a pact with something far older, something much darker than you can imagine. Durant's entity, the one that whispered to him, guiding him through the murders, was not simply a figment of his imagination. It was a demonic force, an ancient being that had somehow crossed into this world, attaching itself to Durant's soul and driving him to commit unspeakable acts. This creature, this thing, thrived on fear, on chaos, and on the suffering of others. It didn't care about the lives it destroyed. It only wanted one thing, control. The more people listened to the tapes, Dr. Howe continued, his voice trembled with fear, the more they invited this thing into their lives. It feeds off the belief in it. It feeds off the fear that it stirs in the hearts of its listeners. The tapes weren't just recordings of a confession. They were an invitation for the entity to possess the minds of those who sought the truth. And as the entity continued to grow stronger, it began to claim more victims, each one linked to the tapes, each one becoming part of the twisted story Durant had told. But Dr. Howe had one final, horrifying revelation. The entity had already set its sights on a new target, the listener. Those who had heard the tapes, those who had listened closely, had unknowingly become part of its reach. The more they listened, the more they believed, the more they fed the entity's power. And once it claimed enough victims, it would be able to cross over permanently. The police had no answers. Dr. Howe was convinced the entity was waiting for something that would allow it to break through and fully enter the world. He warned anyone who had the tapes to destroy them immediately, but it was already too late. The leaks had already spread, and the entity had already begun its descent. The air had grown thick with a sense of impending doom. Those who had once dismissed the stories were now beginning to feel the chilling effects of the entity's presence. People were no longer safe, even within the confines of their own homes. It wasn't just the victims of the murders anymore. Everyone who had listened to the tapes, everyone who had allowed the confession to penetrate their minds, had become part of something much larger than themselves. In the weeks following the release of the tapes, the world had descended into a frenzy of terror. The police were powerless, unable to explain the strange disappearances, the eerie visions, and the increasing number of people who had been driven to madness. The whispers, those haunting whispers that had first been heard on the tapes, now filled the very air itself. It was as if the entity had begun to spread beyond the limits of the recordings, infiltrating the very fabric of reality. And then came the final blow. A package arrived at the local police station. Inside was a new tape, one that had never been heard before. It was marked simply, "The Final Confession." No one knew who had sent it or how they had gotten their hands on it. But they all knew one thing. It was a message from the entity. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the moment when everything would be revealed. The tape was played in the station, and what followed was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Durant's voice echoed through the speakers, but it wasn't the same as before. This wasn't a confession. It was a plea. Listen to me carefully. Durant's voice crackled, hoarse and desperate. "I've done terrible things, but I'm not the one you should be afraid of. The thing I spoke to, it's not just in me. It's in all of you now. You've all listened. You've all invited it in. And now it's coming for you." The room went cold as Durant's voice trembled with fear. The confession was no longer about his crimes. It was about survival. "I never wanted this," Durant continued, his voice now filled with a sense of dread. "I didn't choose it. It chose me. And now it's chosen all of you. The entity, it's a demon. An ancient being that feeds on death, on fear, on pain. It's been here for longer than you can understand. I made a deal with it, thinking I could control it. But I was wrong. It's using me. It's using all of you now. And once it has enough of you, it will break through. It will become." The air was thick with tension as Durant's words sunk in. The police officers in the room exchanged uneasy glances, each one wondering the same thing. Was this the end? Story 5. The Motel and the Curse. There are places in the world that defy explanation, locations where something ancient and malevolent stirs, waiting for the right person to stumble in. A small, run-down motel in the middle of nowhere was one such place, hidden away from the prying eyes of most. It wasn't a place that drew in tourists or passers-by. It was a relic, a forgotten thing left to decay in silence. Yet, for the few who were desperate enough to stay there was one rule above all: never, under any circumstance, enter room 313. The motel, named the Broken Haven, wasn't much to look at. Its faded sign hung crookedly, half of the letters long since lost to time and neglect. A single, dim light bulb illuminated the parking lot, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The walls of the building were stained with the remnants of 1,000 stories, whispers of lost souls, those who had arrived in search of shelter but found only something darker. Room 313 had been sealed off for as long as anyone could remember. No one dared enter it, not even the motel's owner, an aging man named Old Jim, who had worked there for decades. People would whisper rumors when they passed by the motel, but no one could confirm anything, as those who stayed in room 313 either vanished or ended their lives. A dark history, an unexplainable curse. It seemed as though the room had a way of getting under your skin, gnawing at the edges of your sanity until you had no choice but to leave it behind, or worse, never leave at all. The year was 2023, and Ryan Torres, a well-known crime podcaster, was about to walk into the heart of this chilling mystery. Ryan had built his reputation by diving deep into unsolved crimes and paranormal events, his voice a steady companion to his audience late at night. His show, Behind the Crime, had grown immensely popular in the past few years, and tonight he was about to venture into something that would change everything. Ryan had stumbled upon the legend of room 313 during one of his late-night research sessions. He had been digging into strange disappearances when he came across an old newspaper article from 20 years ago. The headline read, "Woman found murdered in motel room 313. No leads, no suspects." Beneath the headline was a grainy photo of a young woman, her eyes wide and lifeless, staring up from a page. The article had been buried deep in the archives of Forgotten Town newspaper, but it left Ryan unsettled. There was something about it, something that didn't sit right. Over the next few weeks, he dug deeper into the story, uncovering fragmented details about the murder. The woman's name was Helen Carter, a tourist who had checked into the motel in 2003. The police had never found a killer, and the case had quickly gone cold. The only other detail that stood out was a strange string of deaths and disappearances that had followed anyone who had stayed in room 313. Ryan's curiosity was piqued. He'd covered countless unsolved crimes, but this was different. This was more than a murder. It was something far more sinister. And like any true crime podcaster, he had an insatiable thirst for the unknown, for the stories that hadn't yet been told. He decided, almost impulsively, that he would stay the night in room 313. The idea seemed reckless, even dangerous, but it was exactly what his audience would want. A live investigation of the most notorious room in the motel's history. If he could uncover the truth, it would be the story of a lifetime, something that would solidify his place in the true crime community forever. The night of his investigation arrived. Ryan drove through quiet streets of the small town, the moonlight casting long, eerie shadows across the empty roads. As he approached the broken haven, the faint glow of the neon sign flickered in the distance, like a warning that no one could truly ignore. It was nearly midnight, and the entire town seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. He parked in front of the motel and grabbed his camera bag. His live stream setup was simple, a small camera mounted on a tripod, a microphone attached to his jacket, and a flashlight in his hand. His audience, already riled up by the anticipation, was eagerly waiting to see what would happen next. Ryan walked up to the front desk where old Jim stood, hunched over behind a tarnished counter. The old man's face was pale, his eyes sunken deep into his skull, but his gaze was sharp as he looked up from the paperwork. He knew exactly who Ryan was. Room 313? Jim's voice was a gravelly whisper, as if he hadn't spoken in years. Ryan nodded, setting up the camera as he prepared for his live stream to begin. "I've done my research. I'm not afraid." The old man's lips quivered. "You should be. No one leaves that room the same. If you even survive." Ryan hesitated for a moment, feeling a strange unease that he couldn't shake off. But then he dismissed the feeling. He had been in plenty of dangerous situations before. This was just another investigation, and it was his job to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. "Just give me the key," Ryan said, his voice firm. Jim handed over a brass key, the number 313 etched into the surface. He didn't say another word as Ryan turned and walked toward the stairs, his camera in hand, the weight of the key in his pocket. As he climbed the staircase to the third floor, the air grew colder. The silence was broken only by the soft sound of his boots against the old wooden steps. He passed the other rooms, each one dark and empty, the smell of mildew and stale air seeping from the cracks in the walls. When he reached the door to room 313, Ryan hesitated. The door was old, its paint chipped and faded, the wood warped from years of neglect. He inserted the key into the lock, his fingers trembling slightly. With a creak, the door swung open. The room inside was dimly lit by the glow of the streetlights outside. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and torn. There were no signs of recent use, but the air felt heavy, as if something had been lingering there for years. Ryan set up his equipment, his camera focused on the bed, his microphone positioned to capture any sounds. "I'm about to spend the night in room 313, Ryan spoke into the camera, his voice calm but filled with anticipation. "Stay with me as we uncover the truth behind the haunting of this motel." The live stream began, and his audience flooded the chat with comments. Ryan's heart raced. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. He had to find out what really happened to Helen Carter, and he was determined to do it live for the world to see. But as the minutes passed, the room grew colder. The silence became oppressive. Then, just as he was about to speak again, he saw something in the corner of his camera's viewfinder. Something moving. At first, it was just a blur, but then it took shape, a face, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at him. The face was distorted, as if it had been caught in a moment of pure agony, and then in an instant it vanished. Ryan's heart skipped a beat. He had seen it. There was no mistaking it. But it couldn't have been real. Not here, not now. His mind raced as he fumbled with the camera, trying to refocus. And then, just as he was about to dismiss the sight, the voice came through the microphone. A woman's voice, soft but filled with despair. "Help me." The voice lingered in Ryan's mind long after it had faded from the microphone, its echo reverberating through the room like a warning. His hands trembled slightly as he checked the live stream chat. His audience was as confused as he was. Messages were pouring in, some skeptical, others filled with panic. His viewers were experiencing the same unease that he was feeling, even though they were miles away, safely behind their screens. Ryan's camera captured the dim room before him. The walls, once white, were now a yellowed shade, streaked with the stains of years gone by. The bed was rumpled, and the curtains billowed slightly from the cold draft coming through a cracked window. But despite the mundane appearance of the room, something was wrong. The atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavier, suffocating, as though it carried the weight of a dark secret. Ryan shook his head, tried to push away the creeping feeling of dread. He refocused on the live stream, clearing his throat as he spoke again, his voice louder this time, though it trembled ever so slightly. "Okay, folks," Ryan said, trying to sound confident. "I know what you heard. I heard it too. I'm just trying to make sense of it, but..." A sharp sound interrupted him. A knock. It came from somewhere deep within the room, from the walls, as though something or someone was tapping from the other side. Ryan froze, his blood running cold. The knock was rhythmic, deliberate. His first instinct was to blame it on the old structure of the motel, on the creaks of an ancient building shifting in the cold night air. But something in his gut told him otherwise. The knocking persisted, growing louder. Ryan's eyes scanned the room, his breath catching in his throat. "Is someone here?" he asked, though his voice was shaky. His camera captured every angle of the room, but there was nothing that explained the sound. "Okay, this is weird," Ryan muttered under his breath. He moved toward the wall where the knocking seemed to originate. His hand trembled as he placed it on the cracked paint, listening intently. "Guys, I don't know what's going on here. I'm going to check it out," Ryan said, speaking to his viewers, trying to maintain control over his own fear. He couldn't let his audience see him crack under pressure. Not now. He slowly stepped toward the wall, the knocking continuing in a rhythmic pattern, as though it were alive. The sound was growing louder, but strangely, it wasn't coming from the other side of the wall. It seemed to be coming from within the walls themselves, as though the very foundation of the room was alive, with an unseen presence. Ryan's camera was still rolling, capturing everything. He knew that whatever he was about to experience, it would be his most intense investigation yet. The closer he got to the wall, the colder the room became. A chilling gust of air swept across the room, sending shivers down his spine. His breath fogged in the sudden drop in temperature. He looked over at the window. It was closed. No draft could explain the freezing sensation that had settled over the room. He stood there for a moment, staring at the wall, the knocking now a deafening cacophony in his ears. It was as if the room itself was alive, demanding attention. Ryan's hands were now visibly shaking as he stepped back. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but his curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. He couldn't leave yet. He had to see this through. For his podcast, for his audience, and for the truth that was buried in room 313. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. A silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself had been held in suspension. Ryan's heart raced in his chest, the blood pounding in his ears. He could feel the tension building, a palpable energy, as if something were about to happen. And then, the woman's voice came again. This time it was clearer, more distinct. "Please, find me?" Ryan's breath caught in his throat. This time, the voice wasn't coming from a microphone. It wasn't coming from his live stream chat either. It came from right behind him, in the room. His heart hammered against his chest as he whipped around. The room was empty. The bed, the curtains, the walls, nothing had changed. Yet, something was wrong. A cold, oppressive presence filled the air, almost like a pressure against his chest. The voice had been so clear. It had come from someone or something right there with him. Ryan swallowed hard, his mouth dry as he stared into the empty space, his camera capturing his every move. He didn't know what to do next. He couldn't just sit here, pretending nothing was happening. He was a seasoned investigator. He knew the tricks, the sounds, the illusions that old places like this could create. But this felt different. This felt real. Taking a deep breath, he moved cautiously to the bed. The sheets were tangled in an unkempt mess, the pillow askew. His eyes scanned every corner of the room, hoping to find something that could explain the strange occurrences. But as he lifted the corner of the pillow to look beneath it, his heart nearly stopped. There, beneath the pillow, was a single photograph. He didn't recognize it at first, but when he picked it up, his stomach dropped. The image was black and white, faded with age, but the face staring back at him was unmistakable. It was the same woman from the news article, Helen Carter, the woman who had been murdered 20 years ago. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. What made his blood run cold was the fact that, in the photo, she was smiling. It was a wide, cheerful smile, almost as if she were alive, full of life. But beneath her smile, her eyes were filled with a strange, otherworldly sadness. A sadness that Ryan couldn't quite place but somehow understood, as though it were meant for him. She was trying to tell him something he wasn't ready to hear. The camera caught every moment, the photograph trembling in Ryan's hand as he held it up to camera. "What the hell?" Ryan whispered, his voice barely a whisper. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in scribbled handwriting, was one simple phrase: "I'm still here." Ryan's hands trembled as he stared at the photograph, the message on the back of it burning into his mind. "I'm still here." The room felt colder now, much colder. It was as if the temperature had plummeted to an impossible low, and the air around him grew thick with a heaviness that made his chest ache. His breath came in short bursts, visible in the freezing atmosphere. He quickly shoved the photograph into his pocket, as if the presence it carried might somehow take hold of him if he lingered too long. The camera continued to capture every moment of the live stream, but Ryan barely registered the constant stream of chat messages that scrolled by in real time. His viewers were frantic, bombarding him with questions. What was that voice? Where's the woman? Are you okay? Their concern for him echoed in his ears, but it couldn't drown out the feeling that something was terribly wrong, something he had yet to fully comprehend. He ran his fingers through his hair, trying to steady his nerves. "I need to focus," he thought, forcing his mind to shift back to the task at hand. Find the truth, find the answers. His eyes scanned the room once again, feeling the weight of its secrets pressing down on him. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating him, as though they were alive with a presence that was watching him, waiting. The whispering, the knock on the wall, it all felt deliberate.